Welcome everyone to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show brought to you by GoldSilverBitcoin.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Adam O'Brien of Bitcoin Well. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today.
Hey, Justin, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we just saw Bitcoin continue a dump, I would say, is how I would explain it. I think we probably got down to around 33K, although I don't really look at the charts too much. And well, let me tell you how I feel. I feel the same as I did at 68,000 or whatever it got up to. How about you?
Yeah, man, I feel the same as when it dropped from when I think my biggest drop was from 1,000 to like 260. And I feel the same as that, right? I keep buying. In fact, I think I buy more now on a cumulative basis than I did back then. We've got it set up at work here where it just kind of automatically comes off your paycheck. And you get it deposited straight into your self-custodied Bitcoin account. So, I put a percentage of my pay into Bitcoin every 2 weeks, and that does its thing regardless of price. So happy days.
Max Kaiser shared a tweet recently where it's like him levitating essentially. And the quote is that like Bitcoiners like when the price declines like it has. And I will say that, I mean, it just doesn't really affect me emotionally at this point. I guess there's a lot of fear out there in the market, and it's just something I've been through so many times that it really doesn't even crop up on my radar. And it's not like we didn't have any hints that this might happen. I think a lot of analysts out there were looking at the charts and saying that you could see how the price might fall to 33K to 28K to even 20K. And people are still saying 20K is in the cards here. I remember when Bitcoin fell from 20K to 3K. Is that what happened? And then it climbed back up to 12K. And when COVID-19 when the governments locked down the world, it fell from like 13K to 3,500 or something thereabouts. You mentioned the drop from 1,000 to 260. Was that in like 2013?
Yeah, it was the Mount Gox crash. I think it was when Mount Gox it was like, man, I almost remember the day. I want to say it was like December 16th, 2013 or something like that. When it just fell off a cliff. I think it dropped from 1,000 to $600, like almost in that one day. And then it continued a bit of a decline from 600 to 260. But I could be wrong. I it's quite a while ago. And like you said, I'm like, yeah, man, pretty emotionally removed from the price. I don't think the price necessarily is a good indicator. It's like, OG Bitcoiners, I guess, they generally understand that this is an accumulation game, not like short-term price signals don't really make much of a difference to me because it's just an accumulation game. Trying to time the market is like, kind of fun, can make for some good conversation, but it's just gambling at the end of the day. It's just gambling. And I think that as a group of Bitcoiners, I think that everyone understands it's an accumulation game.
So on your LinkedIn profile in your bio, you say that you're passionate about rethinking existing systems to unlock new opportunities. What does that mean for you, Adam?
Yeah, I think that like right now our money system is just broken. People don't really understand how broken it is because it works for them. And it only works for them until it doesn't. So I'll give you an example of that. Like, I think that in most cases in society and in the world, we want to have control. We want to be independent in some capacity. We want to have a driver's license. We want to own our own car. People are like hell bent on home ownership because they like the stability. They like the ability to, choose what color the walls are going to be, and they're not going to get evicted because the landlord sold the house or whatever. But nobody seems to want that same level of control with their money, which I find weird. It's like, they want someone else to print it. They want someone else to hold it. They want someone else to invest it. They want someone else to tell them when to spend it. And the thought of holding and controlling our own money is foreign and scary for like the majority of society. Like I talk to people that own, and run $100 million businesses, and they're like, their knock against Bitcoin is like, well, what if I lose the password? It's like, well, my guy, just don't lose the password. Like you're a competent human being. You're running a, $100 million business. And like, surely you're smart enough to just like put that password somewhere safe, like put that private key somewhere safe, put it onto some kind of like, reasonable device, or like, like not electronic device, but like a piece of metal. There's like, not to plug someone, like those Kobo cards are pretty wicked, right? They're like metal, fireproof, all the rest of it. Like just find yourself something that's not going to be destroyed and put it somewhere safe, and you're in good shape. So it's like quite a distance between like people wanting to self-custody their funds and not. I think part of that is just because of what we've been taught. We've been taught that none of us are responsible enough to hold our own money. Guys walk around with a $50,000 watch on, but heaven forbid they have $1,000 cash in their pocket. That's far too dangerous. And like the juxtaposition and the oxymorons in that statement are just hilarious. But I think that like really giving people the tools to use Bitcoin to like, no one's really in North America benefiting from the benefits of Bitcoin right now if it's sitting in some custodial exchange. Like the benefit of Bitcoin is control and the ability to hold Bitcoin yourself and become financially sovereign. And so I think that ultimately, I would say that the key benefit of Bitcoin comes when, the security of Bitcoin is coupled with the benefits of like modern banking, the convenience of modern banking. And that's kind of what Bitcoin Well is set up to do.
You mentioned that we're taught that we don't have the competence to hold our own money. It seems that we have a culture where we like to outsource decisions to specific experts. And I think that we would all do ourselves a favor by taking responsibility for our thoughts, our ideas, our actions, and to come to conclusions and defensible conclusions ourselves based on data that we've dug up ourselves to make decisions about, should we hold maybe Bitcoin? Should we hold even any other alternative? There's other alternatives, including precious metals. I don't really buy into this gold versus Bitcoin thing. I think that diversification is not a bad strategy by any stretch of the imagination. And so therefore, there are alternatives, and they have been reasonable to hold yourselves. And it makes sense when you mention someone with like $1,000 watch on. I mean, people have like $30,000 watches on and no cash, or don't want to hold their own Bitcoin because that's too risky. Any thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Well, it's just hilarious. I totally agree with you. I think it's like, as a society, we refuse to think critically about lots of things, I think. And I think that we've gotten very, very used to being told who the experts are, and anyone outside those experts is crazy or conspiracy theorist or, whatever. And like, I think about early conversations in 2014, 2015, I was talking about Bitcoin, and it's always been a hedge against inflation for me. And I'd be talking to some of my, like, not even my peers, people that were way more sophisticated and advanced and successful than I was. And you'd be like, oh, what do you need a hedge against inflation? Inflation is 2%. What's the problem? I'd be like, well, but the government could print unlimited amounts of money, which would be problematic. Like, oh, the government will never, ever do that. Why would that be in their best interest? They got an economy to keep, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward 3, 4, 5, 6 years to 2021, 2022. And the governments are literally printing unlimited amounts of money. It's like people don't realize, I think, that the politicians play a game in order to stay alive for 4 years. That's their track is 4 years. It's not 6. It's not 20. It's not, next generation. It is a 4-year game for elected officials, all elected officials, because all they have to do is stay alive till the next term. It's just this constant cycle of reelection. And so all they do is maintain things for 4 years. Right now, since April of 2020, the M0 money supply in Canada has increased by 80%, maybe more, actually, probably more now, more than 80%. We should probably get that like actual number, but I'm pretty sure it's more than it will be more than 80%, which means M0, the base layer of money, has nearly doubled in 2.5 years. So it went like 120 years since the beginning of the Canadian dollar, and then in 2 years it nearly doubled. And somehow inflation is only at 7%, and somehow people think the governments are doing a great job owning and controlling the money. And somehow people are excited about like a central bank digital currency, et cetera, et cetera. It's it doesn't make any sense to me.
We always speak here in the US, especially in general, actually, we support our teachers. We say that we need to funnel more money into public schools and education. But what I've seen in my 34 years on this planet is that the public education system is damn near a failure across the board. And we have populations in the Western world that lack abilities to think reasonably and rationally, to use the tools of logic that are at their disposal to come to conclusions that are even based on a semblance of reality. It seems that people have chosen this fantasy land in which there's just short time horizons, just like the politicians. I would say that many of my peers are thinking on even shorter time horizons than 4 years. They're thinking really in the moment, and not, there's like a difference between living in the present and being equanimous and balanced. And then there's difference between only thinking through problems insofar as they affect the current moment. And we've seen that play out in so many ways over the last 2 years in particular, but even more over the last 10 to 12 years. So when the 2008 global financial crisis happened and there was a bailout, that set a really bad precedent, that it was this partnership between big banks and government that was out in the open now, and that if those banks were to fail, the taxpayers would bail them out. And while there might have been a bunch of pain to have experienced if those big banks would have collapsed, there's a lot of people that suggest that all we've done is essentially delay some sort of economic crisis, and economic crises precede all sorts of other crises, cultural crises, social crises, political crises. Civilization can start to break down. And so that's ultimately what brought me to alternatives, financial alternatives, monetary alternatives. I identified that economics and finance were a central part of human existence. And I wanted to, think about ways in which we could decentralize these systems and put power back into the hands of the creditors, put power back in the hands of the people. And I saw gold and silver as one step to that. And while I was deeply embedded in those industries, I then discovered Bitcoin, and it was in some ways based on gold, the mining process, for instance. And it had a fervent community of people who were questioning the systems and rethinking the systems around them. What brought you to Bitcoin ultimately, Adam?
Good question. Yeah, I like where you went there with that, like proof of work. I've been, oh man, just a quick little tangent before your question, I guess. Yesterday, one of the like the Alberta premier, he's like our version of a governor. He tweeted something about our company, like, good story out of Alberta, blah, 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 blah. And the comment section was just like littered with people that, don't like Bitcoin or whatever. Pretty much of a dumpster fire. I tweeted, actually, I commented it and literally said, this comment section is a dumpster fire, or whatever I said, we're so early, implying, people don't get Bitcoin. It's still so early. But one of the things I saw in there was someone talking about, he's like, proof of work is dead. And proof of stake is the only real way to move forward with crypto. And I just that's such a dangerous mindset. The proof of work, proof of stake, like proof of stake does nothing for democratization or and frankly does nothing to set a sustainable society. So anyways, bit of a tangent there, but you were talking about proof of work with gold and
before we
mining
go
and stuff.
on, so proof of work, I've applied this in my life in general. It's like,
Yeah.
I need to prove that I'm doing things. I need to prove that and so that, and even with like a startup, if I in business, right, there needs to be a proof of work there, which is just like evidence that you've been grinding or working
Yeah, man.
or
If
building.
it's like, what did it cost you to get here? And like, there's no proof of work there's a little bit of proof of work, I guess, in like, home ownership, but like you ultimately buy something because you're going to sell it in the future. You're going to be able to maintain it. There's some proof of work with like, you got to put a roof on it. You got to maintain it. So like the maintenance is a little bit of proof of work, but like you counteract that to like Bitcoin mining, where it's like, you have an asset in the miners, and that is what it is. You could sell those if you want to. They're depreciating, so it's not that great, but like that's not really proof of work. The proof of work is that you're spending energy 24/7 in order to try and achieve what you want to achieve. It's like not dissimilar to athletes. Like how many athletes are in the professional leagues that like just didn't work, right? Like you think like, I'm Canadian from Alberta, from Edmonton. So I'm a Connor McDavid fan, obviously. Like, you hear about my son's in hockey, and I took this like training to coach, like I'm a coach of his team. And so it's called PEP. And PEP is the system that Connor McDavid went through when he was like a 10, 13, 15-year-old kid, to like learn how to stick handle and move at the speed that he moves, et cetera, et cetera. And the guy said when Connor started, does your audience like, or people know who Connor McDavid is? Like best hockey player in the world right now. It's like, maybe
Probably
depending on who you
not,
ask.
but now we do.
Okay, yeah, Connor McDavid is like the best hockey player in the world, bar none. It's like unless you're from Toronto. If you're from Toronto, you think it's someone else, but it's not. Anyways, so Connor McDavid, he said when he first came into this program, he was not the best by any stretch of the imagination, but the kid just worked. Like he just worked tirelessly, and like after school, before bed, weekends, like he wasn't out partying. He wasn't out doing his thing. He was at the rink practicing. Proof of work, right? You're not getting that back. You don't get that Saturday afternoon back that you spent 3 hours training. You're not getting that back. That's the proof of work that it takes to get to being, now the highest paid hockey player in the world. That's proof of work, like at its finest. Chef kiss to like the pro athletes way up. Versus like proof of stake, which is just like, well, I have the most hockey sticks, so I'm obviously the best one. It's like, no, you nut job. You can have as many hockey sticks as you want, but if you don't put the time in, if you don't put the hours and the work into being the best, you're never going to be the best. So anyways, bit of a tangent there, but proof of work is very, very, very important if you want quality of a product.
And to state that it's bad for the environment is the domain of neophytes. It's a complete just
dude, it's a fallacy, man. It's absolute fallacy. You think about it it drives me nuts that people don't understand the way that technology is innovated upon. There is no industry on planet Earth more incentivized to advance the case for renewable energy than the Bitcoin mining industry. They have one cost. Their only recurring cost is power. If you had one single cost, would you not be incentivized to long-term invest in making that cost less? That's of course, ASICs and stuff, they have to maintain the machines and whatever, but like their sole recurring cost is power. And so it pains me to think that our world doesn't understand that they will be incentivized to make power as universally and as cheap as possible through technology like renewables, for example. I think didn't a study come out last year that was like, was it 50 or 60% of Bitcoin were mined on renewable energy?
I know that in Washington State, this is an old story in Bitcoin, is that because there is cheap hydroelectric power there, a bunch of Bitcoin miners were moving there. And the city ultimately, I think, amended some laws so that they didn't become essentially a Bitcoin mining hub to the point where it kind of overshadowed other industries that they depended on. But Bitcoiners moved to Wenatchee, Washington, I believe, in order to take advantage of their cost-effective hydroelectric power. And except for a few fringe thinkers or just kind of people who want to like blow up all the dams, that's a real life use case about where people are migrating, what kind of powers they're using in order to mine Bitcoins. And on the environmental front, we mentioned printing. I think it's basic economics that when you're just recklessly printing money, or rather, when you're printing money and there's a lot of money.
Anything that you want to have value. If you endlessly print anything, nothing is worth it.
And then if there's so much cash in the system and people have cash, it promotes recklessness and reckless spending for a couple of reasons. They've got the cash, but most importantly, the money's being devalued. So there's no reason to save. So they're just spending. And it actually, inflationary policies, one might argue, are bad for the environment.
Oh, totally. Like the plastic, like the rush to make non-sustainable goods and the rush to make goods and buy goods that absolutely will not be there in like a year. Like we have this, there's no more maintenance economy. It's just replacement economy, right? You have this, you have a microwave that breaks, put it in the dump, go buy a new microwave, right? You got a dishwasher that breaks, out it comes, in goes a new dishwasher. And that's because of things that you said, this inflationary world that we live in. We're in a period of panic spending to spend the money before the money becomes devalued. Canadian politician named Pierre Poilievre, he had an awesome speech in cabinet a few weeks ago talking about money. He was talking about the history of money, and he went back to like the 1800s. He talked about, I forget when it was, and I forget where it was, so take this with a grain of salt. But he said that at a certain period of time when inflation was running so rampant, people after work would go to the bar and drink on Fridays, and they would order all of their beer at the beginning of the night, because by the end of the night, the beer would be more expensive because the money would be devalued by the end of the day. It's shocking. It's like an absolute shocking picture. And we see it a little bit in the world right now. We see it in Venezuela, right? We see the Venezuelan bolivar running in the gutters. I'm not sure if you were at Bitcoin 2021, but there was an awesome, depiction of Venezuelan bolivar there, where this company was giving away 10,000 Venezuelan bolivar, which was like 4 or 5 cents USD at the time. And people were just like throwing it into the dumpster. It was like a, really crazy moment of like just seeing how worthless fiat currency can be and how much it becomes. And like, we don't think about that today. Like pesos are worthless and we know that, but we just don't think that at one point in time they held a value, and it's just because of reckless governmenting that they are devalued. And like, why couldn't the US dollar, why couldn't the Canadian dollar, the Australian dollar, the euro, the pound, like why couldn't it get there is beyond me, why people don't like think about that.
The story you mentioned reminds me of stories I heard about Weimar Republic in Germany in the 20s, in 1922, 1923, when they had a hyperinflationary event, and people would lock in the price of their meal at the beginning instead of the end because it would change during the course of their meal. So a loaf of bread in Berlin that cost around 160 marks at the end of 1922 cost 200 billion marks by late 1923.
Whoa! In 1 year?
Yeah.
So 200 billion, you said?
It says right here, 200 billion. I counted the zeros like 3 times.
Jeez, man. Like, yeah. Like, so like you think about this hyperinflation event and like, how does that start? Well, it starts by increasing your base money supply, right? I'm not sure what the number is in USA, but in Canada, it's literally over 80% of the base zero money supply. You'll look it up in the USA. But yeah, it's absolutely shocking, man. It's so bad.
There's a story that's going around, and I don't know how accurate it is. One of the narratives we tell ourselves that more dollars were printed in 2020 alone than throughout the entire history of the US dollar, or in the history of the country.
Jeez. Yeah, it looks like you guys have similar problems here from what we do. It looks like there was a big printing event in between 2013, 2014. And then pretty stable printing, a decline of printing actually from 2018 to 2020. And then boom, in 2020. So in 2020, it looks like it went from like the M0 went from like 3 billion to over 6 billion in the last year and a half. So not too dissimilar to what we've experienced in Canada. Shocking. And then I loved the debt thing where it's like, all right, we've got too much debt. We're against our limit cap. We got to raise the limit cap. It's like, oh no, that's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to like just pay down the debt, right? Like imagine if you were like, oh man, I cannot afford these credit card payments. What are we going to do? Increase your credit card so you can spend more. And it was like the worst idea possible.
That debt cannot stop ever. It's a debt-based system, and the U.S. political system and overarching structure is completely dependent now upon the printing of more money, the accumulation of more debt. And so I believe we can see this debt skyrocket from 30 trillion to 300 trillion very quickly, like within 5 to 10 years. So
100%.
now you're talking a lot about alternatives and rethinking systems and people being their own banks. Can you speak to the importance of custody? Obviously, Trace Mayer was a big proponent of this idea that not your keys, not your Bitcoin, meaning that if you held your Bitcoins on an exchange, that they literally were not yours. That exchange might not be holding them. They might be rehypothecating your Bitcoins. They might simply not have them, as people experienced in Canada at Quadriga CX. Is that what it's called?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's the hardest lesson for people to learn. And we've grown up in a custody financial system, so we're comfortable with other people holding our money. I've got this poster on my wall. You can see it right here. This is the gold declaration in 1930 in the 30s, where the government, said, okay, you can't hold gold anymore. We're taking all of the gold. That's only made possible if you have custodians in the mix, because it's a lot easier to go to one custodian holding 30% of the world's gold and say, surrender this gold to us, than it is to go to each individual house and saying, do you have any gold here? Search everyone's house and get the gold. And so I think that outside of the obvious security flaw, let's just talk about that for a minute. Custodians, for example, are a huge honeypot for hackers. Look at crypto.com. Like last week, like they have all this marketing money. They're the owner, or they have the rights for the Staples Center, for goodness sake. Pretty much advertising how much of a honeypot they are. And then what do you know? 15 million. Oh, wait, no, it was 30 million. And who knows how much it actually was going away. And their VCs write the check. So it's like, no customer funds were lost. Like, no. Let's be clear. Customer funds were lost. They just have a financial backer that's going to pay for those. That's what happened there. And so what happens if that's 300 million? What happens if it's 3 billion? How big is that check going to get? How big is that honeypot going to have to be until something catastrophic happens again? Maybe you saw it at, what's the name of the lender that happened to? They were paying out rewards, and instead of setting like $400, they sent 400 Bitcoin by accident. Probably some like hungover employee trying to push the wrong button, and whoops, out it goes. BlockFi, was it BlockFi that did that? Just shocking to see custodians melt down time and time again. And then people still think that custodied solutions are still okay. But all the security implications, whether it's malice or incompetence aside, from a custody standpoint, there is serious control and ownership risk to not owning your own Bitcoin, to not being financially sovereign. If you have money sitting with a custodian, and the government where that custodian is registered or legislated decides they don't want their citizens to have Bitcoin, that custodian will 100% of the time give the funds to the government. No questions asked. It's like a concept of like, who do you think will fight harder, the individual or the government. And when the government is bent on something, they're going to get it. And if you don't think that governments are threatened by Bitcoin, you're wrong and you're not paying attention. And if you don't think that they will come for Bitcoin, maybe not every government, but I do believe, well, look at China, for example, banning Bitcoin every 6 months for the last 5 years. Governments want Bitcoin. And if your money is sitting in someone's custody in China, like you're never getting that back, right? That's just gone. The Chinese government will at some point say, give us those Bitcoin, those are ours. And as a result of your foolish mistake to have your money sitting in custody, it will be gone, which is catastrophic.
And it was BlockFi who accidentally sent users millions in Bitcoin. And when it comes to some of the advertising funds that are being deployed by these big companies, now, of course, I don't really know their overarching budget, but I personally think that's actually a non-issue here. That's good reason for me not to use these platforms. When I see Coinbase advertising on the at the NBA, I'm like, that's a misallocation of funds. No, thank you. When I see crypto buying the rights to Staples Center, I'm like, that's a misallocation of funds. I am not going to be putting any value on that exchange, and so on and so forth. Who was the first one? FTX at MLB, right?
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah,
it might have been
FTX has their branding all over MLB. Like the umpires are wearing FTX stuff, etc. That's a reason for me not to use FTX because of that misallocation of funds.
As a custodian, like businesses advertising is what it is, but as a custodian, I feel like that is where the challenge gets, because if there's no proof of reserves, and if there's no clear transparency and insight into where the custodied funds are, I think it's problematic.
And they're going after those who don't want to self-custody, who don't even know what self-custodying is, might not even know that they can self-custody. And that, in fact, was the original state of Bitcoin, was self-custody only with the Bitcoin Core wallet on your computer. And then Mt. Gox came along, and I believe that might have been the very first option to store money on. There was another one called out of the US, and it was a tree something or other. I forget what it was called, but it was very early on. It didn't last for very long. I think I know that
that wasn't Charlie Shrem's thing, was it?
No, that was Charlie Shrem was he was doing Bit Instant, I believe.
Right.
So I believe that was, you could buy a Bitcoin, etc., from like a 7-Eleven. There was it's just I wonder if one of the listeners knows right now. He's like, oh, I remember where that was, but whatever it was not even probably online for very long. It was Mt. Gox essentially.
Yeah.
So these exchanges, they want people who don't want to self-custody. They want people who want to keep their Bitcoins on their exchange, and I guess ideally forget about them. So can you speak to self-custodying, and if any tips for people, the philosophy behind self-custodying, any tools as well that people can deploy when they want to self-custody?
Yeah, I think that, so obviously self-custody is important to give you pure financial sovereignty and full control. I think that you want self-custody by way of a hardware wallet for savings and a mobile wallet for spending. Thinking of it like a checking and savings account, your debit card, think of it like cash in your pocket versus your savings account. I think personally, that the number one way to buy Bitcoin is frequently and in low quantities. Like I told you earlier, like at work here, lots of our employees participate in a Bitcoin savings plan. And what that Bitcoin savings plan is just money off your paycheck sent directly to your hardware wallet. We set everyone up with a hardware wallet. We're selling this now to other corporations here in Canada. And the first thing we do is get everyone a hardware wallet, walk to their store, show them how to set it up, show them how it works, show them why it's important. They send us the addresses that they want the Bitcoin to be sent to, and off it goes. Voila. So I think it's pretty important to recognize that self-custody can be quite simple, can be automated, and can be set. And you keep that hardware wallet safe. In my opinion, best practice is once a year, you go through, you consolidate your UTXOs. If you're getting multiple frequent transactions, it creates a big kind of like backlog of transaction in your main address book. And so you want to consolidate those UTXOs. What all that is just sending the entire public, the entire XPub, all your transactions worth, sending them in one transaction to just one single address. That could be like your cold storage. So if you have like warm storage on a hardware wallet and then cold storage, which is just once a year, UTXO management is pretty important. Out you go. You do that when the fees are low, it costs you next to nothing, and you're completely self-sovereign. You've got clean UTXOs that eliminate the idea of miner fees being a headache in the future, and that's ultimately the way to do it for sure.
Tell us about your. Oh, did we even get into how you got into Bitcoin? I don't think we actually.
No, I think I went on my
that.
tangent about proof of work.
What's your journey to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I found Bitcoin in 2013. It had hit like an all-time high of $100, and I was like, wow, I got to figure out what this is. I didn't know any, like, I've been pretty technical my whole life, but nothing like more hardware focused. Like I would love when I was a kid taking apart a computer and then putting it back together, or, buying and selling Xboxes or whatever. But I never like learned the beauty of command line. So I kind of like had to teach myself command line, right? First Bitcoin node, like you said, like Bitcoin Core on your computer, like that was how it worked. Then I kind of like dove into why Bitcoin existed, the history of money. It was kind of my first time truly understanding like inflation and fiat currency, the history of fiat currency. Like you're born into the world today, you're just like, this is money. This is what money's always been. But you don't realize like, it used to be pebbles, and it used to be rice, and it used to be grain or cattle or gold. And, you learn about like copper nose and the way that inflation used to work, of like stamping coins so, you learn about all that stuff. And I'm getting more and more convinced that Bitcoin is like solid and pretty good. Go and find one. Find someone to sell me some Bitcoin. Back in 2013, there was like not a lot of options to buy Bitcoin. You could use Mount Gox, which was like wiring money to Russia or Japan, or you could meet like a peer-to-peer transaction. So I did a peer-to-peer transaction, had a pretty bad customer experience, had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. So I kind of did some more research, and then I was that person who had the answers. I would meet people in Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever, and we would eat, drink coffee, and discuss Bitcoin. I would explain to them how the blockchain worked, why it worked, the node and miner, proof of work. And over time, I kind of just got busier and busier and busier doing that. And then I bought and deployed Alberta and Saskatchewan, 2 provinces up here, Bitcoin ATMs, the first ones in 2014. We kind of just continued deploying Bitcoin ATMs across Canada, and here we are today. I mean, publicly traded Bitcoin ATM company up here in Canada. We've expanded into the UK. We've got exciting international expansion plans, across North America here this year, which is pretty cool.
Tell us about being a publicly traded Bitcoin company in Canada.
It's tough, man. People don't understand the industry, and they have all their preconceived notions that they bring to like audits or to regulation or whatever. And so going public took a lot longer, cost a lot more, and was a lot more distracting than it should have been or could have been, just because of the way the industry works. And like, we've got Bitcoin on our balance sheet, for example, and our auditor had no idea how to verify that. And they were like, well, show us the Bitcoin. We were like, well, like, here's the public address, but like, how do you, like, what do you mean? They're like, well, send the Bitcoin somewhere. We were like, no, like, we're not going to, dig up the cold storage and like send these Bitcoin around the world for you to verify. Like, we'll just sign a message on the private key. Like, we'll just sign a message. Like, no, that's not how, so I just had to explain like how, private and public keys work and the whole bit. So a lot more explanation and a lot more nuance to like explaining the business, right? We're effectively a vending machine company. We buy Bitcoin for X, mark it up, and charge it for a little bit more. That makes sense if it's chips, but if you replace chips with Bitcoin, it's just very, very, very confusing. And that's ultimately was the biggest challenge, was explaining the business to people that didn't understand the industry.
What's a big misconception that people have about, in particular, the Bitcoin ATM industry?
I'd say there's like everyone always asks about like laundering money. They assume it's just this money laundering haven. It's not. Like we verify the customers. We're registered with the with FinTrack, which is the equivalent of FinCEN in the States. We have a money service business up here, which is like, you guys have the same money service license down in the States. And it's not a good place. Bitcoin as a whole is just not a good place to launder money with, because it's tracked, it's traceable. We saw, what was the Ethereum platform that got hacked like a few months ago, $100 million made away. And then they tracked the hacker down in like 4 or 5 days. Like, it was like laughable. And then they tried to spin this story like, oh, it was a white hat and he did it. We paid him to do it. And, blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's just, you can just track things on the blockchain. So it's just not a good place to launder money. I think that's kind of the biggest misconception about Bitcoin ATMs.
What else is on your mind in terms of like rethinking systems in Bitcoin?
I think that Bitcoin is not wildly accessible right now. And so I'm pretty passionate about making sure that, like I said earlier, I think people can utilize the security that Bitcoin offers, like the deflationary principles, the self-custody principles, the, verifiably trust, don't verify, don't trust kind of technology that Bitcoin has. And, us coupling that with modern banking, right? Like tap your phone to pay for things, easy one-touch buy, sell Bitcoin. Like up here in Canada right now, you can pay virtually any bill at bitcoinwell.com. So you like go spend your Visa card or your Amex or whatever you're all month. And if you're 100% in Bitcoin, you now have the ability to pay in Bitcoin. To you spend the Visa card, and then you make your 1 monthly payment from Bitcoin to pay that card off. Same with your hydro bill or with your taxes or what have you. And I think that's really important. Like creating a society that has the tools at its disposal to live on and use the Bitcoin standard, I think is a pretty important piece. And that's kind of ultimately what we're doing.
Can you talk more about what you're doing? Like, how are you a non-custodial Bitcoin company? What is a non-custodial Bitcoin company?
Someone who sells direct to consumer. So there's 2 kinds of ways to buy Bitcoin. One is with a custodial account where you send money, send fiat, they credit your account. You then go into a trading platform. You either make a market order where you buy the last ask, or you make a bid where you say, I will only buy Bitcoin at this price. And then when that trade occurs, the money goes into your account again, and then you have to withdraw it in order for you to use it properly, in order for you to actually have use and control of the Bitcoin. Versus what we've done. So at a Bitcoin ATM, for example, you walk up, scan the Bitcoin QR code, insert your money. Bitcoin is sent from the hot wallet in the machine directly to your, so no account. It literally takes 5 seconds between payment and getting Bitcoin in your ownership and in your control. You're done. The other way that we're doing that is online. So in Canada right now, we're just about ready to launch our Visa debit platform. Really be able to sign in to an account, enter your Bitcoin address. It's still the first step. You enter your Visa debit card, and then you pay you pay for the Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin is sent from the hot wallet directly to the consumer. So I think those are kind of the most important things that is about a non-custodial business, is having this direct to consumer relationship, this this ability for customers to know that they're getting Bitcoin directly, rather than having to mess around and go through this permissioned system of, do I have permission to withdraw this Bitcoin? Is my account blocked? So do I have to verify anything else? Like I have experiences myself on custodial platforms where, you can deposit all this money and then, you can only withdraw 0.5 Bitcoin a day. And it's like, what? Like, why? This is my money. Why can't I get this out? It's the same thing at the banks, right? The banks, you have 100 grand in your bank account, but you can only take out 3 grand a day unless you go through a rigmarole and a bunch of hoops. And that's like, it's problematic. That should be a problem.
Looking at this Jason Kenney thread now. So he is like a governor, like you said, a great Alberta investment story from Bitcoin Well. And then some of the comments are, oh, isn't Bitcoin taking a beating in the stock market?
Yeah, yeah. I like that one too. It's like Bitcoin's not on the stock market.
Yeah, then falling for the Bitcoin scam, incredible Rube expletive. So that's from somebody who's into ETH. Your government had nothing to do with this. Stop taking credit for things you didn't do. So that's somebody very clearly happy with
Yeah,
their
that's like,
representative right now.
yeah, they're not wrong about that either. We know up until recently we've gotten next to zero government support, which I don't think is surprising to anyone who's in the Bitcoin industry listening.
Not to me. So you then tweet, thanks for the shout out. We should definitely chat about how Bitcoin can be a tool to build Alberta back to financial sovereignty. So how can Bitcoin be a tool to build Alberta back to financial sovereignty?
Yeah, this is taking the Bitcoin savings plan and putting it on steroids. Countries that adopt the Bitcoin standard and live in such a way that is proof of work based and not in a constant debt cycle. Um, as it sits right now, the government is running a deficit, burning cash, which in certain circumstances require that, right? Businesses go through growth spurts. You got to burn cash in order to make cash in the future. I get that. You got to invest to grow, and that's totally fine by me. In my opinion, we need to have Bitcoin on the balance sheet of Alberta. All nations, all states need to have Bitcoin on their balance sheet in order to be outside of the federal handcuffs that currently exist. Right now, the way this money system works is the feds print the cash and send the cash to the provinces that they decide need the cash, or they print more cash, making the existing cash worth a lot less. And so on a Bitcoin standard, you remove those handcuffs. You are no longer at the mercy of the feds, of money printers, and you have the ability to benefit society from there. Maybe you lower property taxes, right? Maybe that's municipal governments, I suppose. But there are other incentives that you can have. You lower business taxes. Right now, we don't have any state tax or provincial sales tax in Alberta as a result of some sovereignty and some financial sovereignty from decades ago. But other provinces could eliminate their provincial sales tax, as an example. You think about where we invest our money, and you think if 10% of that went into Bitcoin and we held that Bitcoin, one, it will become an asset that you can borrow against, and two, it will increase in value over time. Historically speaking, it will increase in value over time. And that's unlike any other asset. Well, it's not unlike any other asset, but it's very, very unlikely that other assets will outperform Bitcoin in the next decade or so. And I think that provinces, states, countries that put Bitcoin on their balance sheet will ultimately start reaping the rewards in like 5 to 10 years. But again, politicians don't look 5 to 10 years out. A politician that puts Bitcoin on their balance sheet needs it to perform in 4 years. Otherwise, it will look like a ruse. It doesn't matter what happened 10 years, 15 years from now. They won't get the credit for it, and they'll be out of office. And so politicians don't think like that. They don't work like that.
How is the El Salvador example playing out, in your opinion?
Early, very, very early. I mean, they're buying, man. It's interesting that they're buying so much. I don't know how needed, how much we need countries like El Salvador is a pretty dangerous place, and if they want to be a hub for like all these rich nerds to go live, they're gonna have to clean that up quite a bit. So I think there's a lot of work to do from like a logistics standpoint. As far as Bitcoin adoption, like El Salvador will be the richest country in the world if no one else adopts Bitcoin at the pace that they are. Like MicroStrategies is probably going to be its own country here soon. And then El Salvador is in like second place. I think as far as Bitcoin holdings go, there's like a small country that owns like the third largest amount of Bitcoin in the world, because they confiscated it like 10 years ago. And I think that like those Bitcoin are probably stuck or lost at this point, but I'm pretty sure that El Salvador buying the dip, and consistently having this accumulation strategy is going to bode very, very well for El Salvador. And we will start to see sovereignty 10, 15 years from now from countries that do similar things.
I wonder where El Salvador stores its Bitcoins. Is it self-custodying or
It's a really
otherwise?
good question. I would probably suspect it's through a custody platform, because there's this like sham of a belief that insurance people are going to actually pay out if custody fails. I just don't believe that to be true. We see insurance companies not wanting to pay out legitimate claims all the time, and mismanagement of custody funds is a pretty easy one to get out of from an insurance company. But I would hazard a guess that the regulations in El Salvador require them to put it on a custodial platform, but it'd be interesting to kind of know.
So you mentioned you were at Bitcoin 2021, correct?
Yeah.
How was it going from Canada to Florida?
Well, it was awesome. It was hot. Weather-wise, it was just great. It's always great to go to Florida, regardless of the time of year. But yeah, it was a noticeable difference between like Florida. The state of the world in Florida is quite a bit different than what it is here in Canada. So it was nice. It was nice to get together, nice to see everyone, be around a bunch of Bitcoiners all in the same room. Those conferences have changed quite a bit since I've started going. Like, I went to a couple Bitcoin conferences 2013, 14, 15, and then here they are in 2020, 2021. They're like way different than they were back then. So it was great. My favorite part, and like to kind of bring it full circle, was not my favorite part, but having Floyd Mayweather come out and shill that scam coin. And then, me like super calling it out at that time and being like, oh, that's a sham. He should get sued for that. And then like here we are, like, last month it comes out that he's getting sued. Pretty hilarious, I think.
That was the nodder of the conference for me. The low point was Floyd Mayweather coming out and shilling token. So now, what is next for Bitcoin Well? What should people be keeping an eye on?
Good question. Right now, we've got kind of like three main pillars that we focus on. One is that non-custodial financial services model, like the, convenience of Bitcoin, the security of Bitcoin, convenience of modern banking. The second pillar is the technology to make that possible. And then the third pillar is education focused. So on that kind of first pillar, our online platform is obviously going to be coming up here soon. Non-custodial ways to buy, sell, and use Bitcoin. Made for the mass market. So easy your grandma can do it is the idea. If your grandma uses Amazon, she will be able to buy Bitcoin at bitcoinwell.com. That's the idea. The second piece is the technology. We've developed our Bitcoin ATM software, and we'll be selling that to other Bitcoin ATM operators with the idea that we know what operators need because we've been doing it for so long. And we have developed it out of a need for ourselves. We realized it was good. There was a market need for it. We want to allow other operators to make Bitcoin accessible just like us. At the end of the day, we're never, ever going to have 100% of the retail Bitcoin market, ATM or otherwise. And our software can allow us to be kind of the engine that powers that Bitcoin retail market. And then that third piece, education. This year, we launched the Bitcoin Academy in partnership with a Canadian university. And so we'll be expanding on that, really, really educating people about the Bitcoin standard, why it's important, et cetera, et cetera.
What is the Bitcoin standard?
The Bitcoin standard is having your wealth in Bitcoin and having a low time preference. The idea of time preference is, do you need things fast or do you need things later? And you get caught spending money on things you don't need in a high time preference. If you prefer having things fast, you eat fast food, you buy garbage, trinkets, you don't work out, you're not healthy, you spend, you're in the spend mentality, versus someone who is capable of kind of waiting those things out, saving and accumulating more Bitcoin. The Bitcoin standard incentivizes savings and not spending.
How about like at a wider societal level? What is the Bitcoin standard?
Good question. I think that it's that mindset of saving and not spending. We have to rush to spend our money right now before it becomes devalued. Debt is cheap. Buy a couch, pay for it in 120 days, or buy a car and pay for it for 10 years, buy a boat and pay for it for 30 years, buy a house and pay for it for 30 years. We give ourselves handcuffs as a society. And so I think societally speaking, we want to have more control. We want to be sovereign, and sovereign is many different forms, right? It's the removing yourself from a system that has the power to tell you what you can and cannot do. And a big piece of that is your money. And if you are self-custodying and in a constant accumulation of Bitcoin, you are financially sovereign, which is a big piece of being sovereign as a whole.
I feel like in some ways, Bitcoin in a Bitcoin standard is the antithesis of the consumer driven lifestyle we live today. So as one example being, like, some significant percentage of the luxury cars out on the roads today are not owned by the drivers. They're just financed. And it's almost as if it's like it's a class thing. It's complete, just people want to be associated with wealth, even if they don't have not accumulated wealth. And so they take out debt to buy a fancy car that costs more money to fix than the alternative. And that's reckless.
Big time. It's very reckless. It's on a Bitcoin standard society, we're not financing things we don't need. We are maintaining the value that we create with our time today for as long as humanly possible. And the best tool to do that is Bitcoin.
We've had the honor of sitting down today with Adam O'Brien of Bitcoin Well. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today.
Amazing. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening.